Hello there, this is Dan, and you're about to listen to an extract from an episode of the Cushing podcast. Unfortunately, our homepage at noisybark.com is no longer online, but we hope to have a new homepage set up soon. Watch for updates on Facebook and Twitter under @LeeCushingPod. In the meantime, stick with our home on YouTube, Ambidextrous Solutions Limited, to hear more extracts like this one. The presenters are Howard and myself, and the music is by Greg Hume. Dead of Night.
Dead of Night!
Wow.
Wow.
Oh man, right, okay.
Well, an absolute classic.
Yes, well, it's not the first ever British horror film, is it? But,
No.
But it's one of the very early examples of the genre, 1945.
There are very few horror films we made in Britain in the 1940s, early 50s, actually, before Hammer came along. It's a great film. It's an Ealing film.
Yes, Ealing, the British studio run by Michael Balcon, which is most famous, remembered now for its comedy films. Real classics, running from The Lady Killers, which was the last one in 55, but earlier ones like The Titfield Thunderbolt.
Kind Hearts and Coronets, which is one of my all-time favourite films. Possibly I would say it is my favourite film, Kind Hearts and Coronets. It's just
Man of good taste.
Sublime.
It is fantastic.
Whiskey Galore, Passport to Pimlico, those sort of things.
Is Arsenic an Old Lace one?
No, that's American.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Right. I guess I've always kind of bracketed it together with Kind Hearts and Coronets. Similar kind of, because that's sardonic kind of title. Yes, Lavender Hill Mob, great little movie. And a lot of kind of wartime.
They also, didn't
dramas.
just make. People always think about the Ealing comedies. They made lots of different kinds of film. They made another one of my favourite films, which is a wartime film. If you've never seen it, please do watch it. Called Went the Day Well.
I knew you were going to mention that.
I absolutely love this film. It's where an English village is sort of infiltrated by Nazis in disguise, and it's how all the villagers fight back. And the local squire turns out to be a traitor. That's not a spoiler because you know that right from the beginning. He's a baddie, and he gets his comeuppance, which is great. It's got one of the actors who's in Dead of Night, a wonderful, wonderful Welsh character actor called Mervyn Johns, who is just always great. He's one of the great character actors. Shame he wasn't in any Hammer film actually, because he would have been.
He would have been perfect.
Yeah, he would have
been. So they did quite a range of genres. So they did quite a range of genres, and during the war, their films were kind of often kind of propaganda war films, which Went the Day Well is. It came out during the war, and it's designed to terrify.
And it does.
And galvanise
it's a very,
the
very
British
hard-hitting film.
Yeah, I saw it when I was very young, and there's the bit that I always remember is that the Germans, when they've occupied the village, there's one of them having breakfast in this woman's house, and she takes him by surprise and throws salt in his eyes, and then overpowers him.
And then kills him with an axe.
Oh, God, yeah. So.
Which is strong stuff for 1942. And don't forget, this was in the very middle of the war. We didn't know how things were going to turn out then.
Yeah.
So
and it has that kind of transgressive quality that the early Hammer films have in the sense of exploding out of the kind of genteel movies at the time, and kind of going beyond that quite startlingly. It is still on, I think, Film 4 quite a lot, so check that out.
Yeah, definitely watch it.
We're not talking about Dead of Night. And we're still not going to do it because I'm just going to mention one other Ealing film that's not a war film or a comedy. It's called The Halfway House. Do you remember that?
I know the title.
It's a kind of... I almost regarded it as a sort of companion piece to Dead of Night. Although it's not a horror film, it does have a supernatural element. And it has Mervyn Johns and his daughter, Glynis Johns, running this hotel. But they're possibly dead. And the people who go and stay at the hotel are kind of taught a moral lesson from beyond the grave or something. I can't really remember.
I'll have to look out for that.
But it's I do remember enjoying it. But yes, in Dead of Night, Mervyn Johns, who we keep mentioning, is a character who's he goes to this house where a kind of conference is going on.
Well, there seem to be there's a group of people there because you're not really supposed to know because it's all. There's a great twist at the end. Mervyn Johns goes to this house. He doesn't know why he's gone there. He's had a dream where he goes to this house, and so when he wakes up, he goes to the house, and there's all these people there, and they all tell their story. This is an anthology film. This is a portmanteau film. This is the genre, the format that Milton Subotsky appropriated 20 years later for Dr. Terror's House of Horrors,
Yes, so
Torture Garden, all the rest of them.
We did mention it in that episode of the podcast.
Yes,
yeah.
4 or 5 stories in one film with a connecting story. And they're all, but they're all very different. They're all slightly different lengths. The stories in this, and they all got a different tone.
Yes.
There's one. Well, we'll come to the Michael Redgrave one later because
Sure.
That's one.
Yeah.
But there's one with
the obvious
Basil
one.
Radford and Norton Wayne, who are Charters and Caldecott, the Lady Banishers, which is quite a light-hearted sort of story about these two golfers.
Yeah,
one
yeah.
dies and comes back as a go. Now, everybody is quite dismissive of that. I think it's great because I love Basil Radford and Norton Wayne, and it's just a little amusing trifle, just a little ghost story,
I think
light-hearted thing before the.
I think some people in the horror audience will dismiss the comedy segment, which a number of anthology movies have. I mean, I remember watching Twilight Zone, the movie, when I was quite young, and disliking the Steven Spielberg section called Kick the Can because it's not scary. It's about It's a nice magical story about old people. It's like Cocoon. And you want to be scared. So I think that people have been dismissive towards that segment of Dead of Night in the same way. By the way, what we should say is that unlike all of the Amicus anthology films and a number of the other anthology films, Dead of Night is not directed by one director.
No.
It has a different director for each segment.
Yes.
The comedy segment with Charles and Caldecott is directed by Charles Crichton, who had directed, or was to direct, several of the Ealing comedies. I think he did the Titfield Thunderbolts.
He did Lavender Hill Mob as well, I think.
And later in his career, he went to TV and directed lots of episodes of The Avengers and things like that, and Space 1999,
Right.
which we'll be talking about later in the series. And his last film was A Fish Called Wanda in the late 80s.
Yes, he went out on top because he did go into television for a while. The British film industry went through a bit of a crisis in the 1970s, so there wasn't a lot of work around for anybody. So a lot of directors, certainly a lot of kind of horror film directors, sort of went into television for a bit, directing episodes of various different series. But then John Cleese asked him to direct A Fish Called Wanda, so it was sort of ended on a high.
Yeah, I mean, he was quite elderly when that film was made. I don't think he lived for too long afterwards. And I think probably some people were doubtful that should we give this movie to this old guy. But John Cleese, who was the star of that movie and wrote it and was one of the producers, was such a fan of those Ealing comedies, and he insisted on Charles Crichton. And I think Cleese might have had to sign something, some kind of insurance waiver that said something like, if he dies halfway through the production, I'll take over and finish it, something like that. You know, he had to make concessions to get Charles Crichton on board, but he did. The film was made, and it's great. So yeah, so he's on board for Dead of Night doing the comedy
Alberto
section.
Cavalcanti, who directed Went the Day Well,
Yes,
was one of the directors.
credited simply as Cavalcanti.
Cavalcanti, yeah, because he was.
They
couldn't fit Alberto Cavalcanti on the thing. It was too long, so they just called him Cavalcanti.
Is that really what?
No, I don't know. It is a bit of a mouthful.
I wondered if he was like Valley, like Lida Valley.
Well, yeah, it could have been, yeah.
But yeah, so he did Went the Day Well, and as we say, Went the Day Well is an alarming and vicious film, and it makes sense when you watch Dead of Night. Cavalcanti's sequence is the one that's most fondly remembered. Again, it's the Michael Redgrave one, so we won't talk about it just yet.
Yeah.
I think we should just say, I've just said it's most fondly remembered, and it's the one I remember the most. I can't remember too much about the others, and I'm not sure who directed them. The other directors are Robert Hamer.
Well, Robert Hamer directed Kind Hearts and Coronets. The first story is about a guy in hospital, and he has a nightmare where he goes outside hospital and a hearse pulls up driven by Miles Mallison.
Oh, right.
I said, room for Bodmore inside, sir. And the guy wakes up. Oh, no. Okay, the guy wakes up. And then, I don't want it spoilers, you see, because all these films have a twist at the end. But anyway, that's what happens. And then something happens.
And of course, Miles Mallison is a horror.
He's a Hammer
actor.
regular.
Well,
in the early ones, he usually played a cleric or sort of like some pompous official or something.
Well,
he's in Dracula and he's in Hound of the Baskervilles.
And he's in Brides of Dracula.
Yes,
as well.
yeah.
And he's also in. I mean, he wasn't just a horror actor, but he was a kind of widely used comedy character.
He was in everything. He's in all the Bolton Brothers films with Terry Thomas and Peter Sellers and all that lot. And he was a writer as well. He wrote films. He wrote film scripts. He wrote a film about Queen Victoria and things like that. Yeah, he just pops up all over the place.
Right.
And he's always great. He always plays the same part. But he's the hangman in Kind Hearts and Coronets as well. So
okay.
He's always. Christopher Lee does a very good impression of him on YouTube.
All right.
There's a little clip of him when Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing recorded the narration for a series about Hammer films. I think this is them just kind of off before the recording, after recording, whatever. They're just talking to each other, and Christopher Lee's doing his impression of Miles Mallison, and Peter Cushing is in hysterics.
Right.
So
Okay.
see that on YouTube. It's worth.
But yeah, Miles Mallison is also in Peeping Tom, Michael Powell's controversial early 60s British horror film, which is kind of gritty and real world and satirical and transgressive in a different way to the Hammer films. So by being in that and the Hammer films and Dead of Night, even though he's not purely a horror actor, I think Miles Mallison's a lovely kind of thread between different types of British horror.
His contribution is very significant to British horror films. The second story is about a young woman who meets a boy at a party and he turns out to be a ghost. And that's not a scary one. That's quite a little gentle little drama. Again, they're all tonally quite different.
Yeah.
The first story is about a haunted mirror. Googie Withers and her husband buy this haunted mirror which a man committed a murder in front of, and the guy...
I think that might be Basil Dearden who directed that.
Possibly. Anyway, it all ends up badly. I don't you get spoilers, you've got to be...
I mean, I think because there wasn't a horror genre, a horror pantheon in Britain at the time, I don't think the people making it were going, let's make a horror film. So parts of it aren't so much horror, but they wanted to make a supernatural drama.
Yeah, I think it's a supernatural... It's like a book, an anthology of ghost stories.
Do you know who directed the linking story? Oh,
that might be Cabell County as well, but I wouldn't swear to it.
Yeah, well, it's obviously he's one of those directors of the main stories, but I don't know. Yes, so spoilers, listeners. Exposing ignorance going on here. Sorry about that, but I think now it's safe for us to talk about the Redgrave sequence.
Yes, you have the Haunted Mirror story, then you have the Basil Radford Norton Wayne story, and then you have the last one, the one that everybody remembers. It's become a classic, iconic sort of moment in horror films and in British filmmaking. It's Michael Redgrave and his incredibly sinister ventriloquist dummy, little Hugo, what you doing, Hugo? And it's just brilliant. He's brilliant. The story, the way it just unfolds.
Well, I remember
terrifying
when I was very young. My dad would tell me things about the movies or shows that he'd seen that I was too young to watch. And I remember him summing up Quatermass and the Pit. This is the one where they find a spaceship buried in the underground. I was like, what? Sounds amazing. But he told me a bit about Dead of Night because I think I'd discovered in some other way that I was frightened of ventriloquist dummies. I think this was because I grew up at the time when you'd get the character on the television. What was he called? Lord Charles.
Oh yeah, Ray Allen and Lord Charles. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Hugo was a bit like Lord Charles.
I found him funny, but also somewhat disquieting. And my dad said, I remember seeing an old film where it's about a man who's a ventriloquist, and he has a dummy, but the dummy starts to turn into him, or he starts to turn into the dummy, or something. He couldn't really explain it to me very, very clearly, but that's the point. It's you don't quite know what's going on, and it delves in kind of areas of schizophrenia and things.
Yes, it's psychologically tormented man.
And by going into those areas, it's dealing with material that wasn't so well understood at the time. So it's quite groundbreaking.
It is a groundbreaking film. It's a great film in and of itself. The way it's made, the cast, and it established the idea, for instance, that anthology films should have all-star casts. This film has an all-star cast. It has Michael Redgrave, Mervyn Johns, Googie Withers, Basil Radford, Norton Wayne, Roland Culver, all big stars at the time. That's something that Milton Subotsky took to the Amicus ones that he did. You can get lots of big stars just for a day or 2 days to film something. The idea of a linking story. Instead of just having 5 separate stories, one after the other, you have a linking story, and there's a twist at the end, and the twist in this is just amazing, brilliant. And each of the individual stories has a twist as well. All those things I think there was, in America, a Hollywood anthology film called Flesh and Fantasy, which was made before this, with Edward G. Robinson in one of the stories. Possibly Henry Fonda and Barbara Stanwyck. And
not a horror film.
Supernatural film.
Oh, right.
Yeah. I think Edward G. Robinson is told by a psychic or something he's going to commit murder. So it's that sort of... It's not a horror film. Not a horror film. Edward G. Robinson wouldn't be in a horror film, I don't think. But
for shame.
Because he's brilliant. But a supernatural drama, shall we say? Again, I think there's 3 stories in that. There's 5 stories in this. So very influential film, and also they also tried to do it. Dickie Attenborough made a film called Magic.
I've seen Magic in 1978. It's really a kind of full-length version of the Redgrave story, and it's quite good. It's got Anthony Hopkins as the Michael Redgrave character. I mean, it's not strictly an adaptation of that story.
No. It's just the idea is the same.
It's a quote original unquote screenplay by William Goldman, which kind of extrapolates from that idea, and it's also got Burgess Meredith in it,
and Margaret.
Yeah, and it's on the Horror Channel sometimes, and I think it was. I remember it being quite good.
I think it's okay, and Hopkins is always worth watching, but I think it's a very slender idea that's extended perhaps a bit too far. The Redgrave story is only about 15-20 minutes long, and that's, I think...
It's perfectly done, and it's also the most... It's the one which is remembered best, I think, because it's the one which sets the template for what a horror anthology story would be like. It's a horror segment.
Yes.
The other segments are different kinds of things. This is a horror story, and people kind of want 4 of those when they go see a horror anthology movie, But no, it is absolutely terrific.
Yes, it's superb. The whole thing. It's and it is a classic. All the film books will give this 4 stars, whatever the maximum is. It's considered an absolute classic by film scholars and everybody, and it should be on more often. That should be on some channel. I don't know whether the Horror Channel show black and white stuff, but
they don't seem to. But I think that film is probably on Film 4 from time to time with the rest of the Ealing.
It's definitely worth watching.
Yeah,
it's a very important film.
I've got
in history of British films, and it's also and it's very funny as well. It's got some very funny moments in it.
You really might want to watch it again, actually.
Yes,
It's been too long. Great. Well, there we are. Dead of Night.
Dead of Night.